All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another fun episode of Photoshop Party. Today is Tuesday, the 22nd, so 2/22/22. It's almost 2/22 where I'm at. We're at 2:06, so we're gonna celebrate a whole bunch of twos today. Anyway, enough of that two stuff. Today we're lucky to have Kimberly Olker coming on today to talk about masking in Raw and Lightroom, and hopefully I can learn a little. Well, hopefully I will learn a lot because this is one of my weaker areas. So I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly, and she's going to rock and roll.
Thanks. I don't think you have weak areas. All right, I'm going to share my Lightroom screen, the whole screen, because otherwise when things pop up, you guys won't always see it. And I just picked a few different photos, and please interrupt me with any questions whenever you guys want. But I picked photos to purposely try and show changes I want to make, but what I want to go over. And so this is Lightroom. We're in the library module. I'll just pick one picture here, go to develop module. And I'm mainly going to go over masking. And it is similar in Camera Raw. The things that Photoshop, Lightroom, Camera Raw all made changes last October, and they really improved the masking tool. So where I used to do the majority of my editing in Photoshop and more of the culling in Lightroom and some basic edits, now I'm able to do a significant amount inside of Lightroom and not go to Photoshop as often, except when I need to add image presentations and things. So the masking tool is this circle with the dotted line around it over here on the right-hand corner. And it brings up a menu now. It used to be something just really simple as like you could do a radial gradient, drawing a circle or an oval, and you could do a linear gradient. Now we have a lot more choices, and then we can have multiple masks, which are essentially layers, and we can do some really cool things with adding, subtracting, and intersecting with masks, which that's where it gets really cool, is with the intersecting. So I'll just walk through these really quick. Select subject. It's amazing how powerful. I think Photoshop, Lightroom, all of them, Adobe did an amazing job with how well they automatically select a subject. It did a pretty good job here on the senior. When you're doing the masking, you can change whether or not you want to see the overlay of the mask and what color it is. So if I had it like blue here, it might not have shown up as well for me. I mean, it does, but it doesn't show me really easily. So you can pick that depending on the image you're looking at or just what your preference is. So that, come on, pick the green. Sometimes it switches to the dropper. So sometimes it's fuchsia for me. Sometimes it's green. It depends. So select subject does a really good job. Once you have a single mask, this will create a whole list of them if you have layers, but you can also click on it and add and subtract. So it's telling us mask one, which I could rename. If you are somebody who has a lot of masks, you might want to rename it, you know, a senior cutout or something like that. Come on, finish the teeth. There we go. And then you could have like sub masks underneath it. So I can add or subtract if for some reason I wanted to add, and you can add it in all the choices you have originally with masks. Let's say I want to add, I don't know, this line here that's going through his head, which is obviously why this doesn't go into competition. I can just draw it on with the brush. I can also subtract if, let's say, it chose too much or I wanted to remove the ball. When I'm still in this adding though, that I'm doing right now, this brush one, I have options with the brush. There's two brushes over here, A, B, and then there's erase. So I have my A set to be this size with full flow, but I have my B set to be at about 40, or no, make it like 50% flow. So if I wanted to do another line, you could see it's adding it to the mask, but partially transparent, part of that mask. So you can determine how you're adding on with the brush. You have a lot of power with size, feathering. The two circles are showing your feathering. So I can increase my feathering, and the inside is where it's going to be strongest, and it's going to feather between the two circles. I can also erase and increase my erase size so you guys can see it, and erase. Now I'm not erasing on him because I'm currently erasing only in the submask of the brush I did, not the subject. So this is where it's like layers, and they do a really good job. So if I just want to get rid of what I added, but I'm not getting rid of my original one. The one thing that got me a little confused at one point, I tried to like add and subtract. You can use the two brushes and the erase while you're adding. So in a way it's an add and subtract, but just on what you're doing. Let me draw, go back here to the brush, draw another line. Okay, so I added that line. Now if I do a new sub layer and I say I'm doing a brush and I said I'm subtracting, this is where it's backwards because the layer is thinking I'm subtracting. So my A brush is actually doing the subtract, not the erase, because I'm in a subtract mode, not an add mode. So you kind of have to think of your brushes as normal when you're adding and as backwards if you're subtracting. So I could actually erase while I'm subtracting. Sounds really weird, but when I do that, only on what I just had affected. So I could, it's not anywhere else. So it kind of, that can get confusing. So I'm going to back out of all that. We're going to delete my brush 2, which was the subtract, and delete the brush 1, which was the add. You can delete all these little 3 dots, give you options. And there's also an eyeball tool, turning it on and off. Now, I've made this mask, but I haven't actually done anything inside this mask. I'm just trying to show you the masking right now, just for the sake of showing you, you know, that you're only controlling that. I'll lower the brightness. There we go. Drop the exposure, but here's without my mask. Here's with my mask. So I'm going to walk you through a few more of the other masks, but I can do it in an adding or subtracting. So there's select sky is not going to work here, but it is really cool. We have brush, which you just saw, linear gradient, which is, you should be used to that with Photoshop, where you're like drawing a cross in a line. Radial gradient, a radius, so a circle and oval. The cool additions here, we have color range, luminance. I haven't done depth range yet. Also added in here. So each of these you can, okay, we'll just get rid of my original one. We're gonna start over. Okay, let's say I wanna do color range, and I'm gonna pick all the blue. It did a pretty good job. It's turned it green for me to see it. I can refine this. add to it, fine. But what if I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. I've gotten it off the wall here, but let's see, is it, I want to, it's not all the way to the edge, or I'm trying to, oh, here's something else. So the words Rockland on his ball, it got the R, but it didn't get the rest. I can add to it. If I click on a new spot, it's just going to pick a totally different color. But if I do shift, I can add just the rest of the word Rockland by adding that color. So let's say I want to take this mask, I can show the overlay or not, and I'm gonna do something so I can, it's obvious, I'm gonna drop the saturation. Well, now I can see it didn't get everything. There was a couple more blue spots. Maybe I liked it on him, but I didn't like it on the back. So I'm gonna show you how to change that. It's kind of cool. So what we're gonna do is do an intersect. So I showed you I can add and I can subtract to a mask. Intersecting is essentially a subtract and invert. I haven't showed you invert yet. So let me first do that. We're gonna go back, delete the mask, create a new mask, select subject. So once again, I'm selecting the senior, and there's an invert button here in the upper right. It's also one of the options when you click on that 3 dots on your layer, and if invert. So while there's not a select background, essentially there is. You select the subject and you invert. Same thing like select sky. If you want to select everything except the sky, it was, you like the exposure in the sky and everything else, not so much. You can select sky and invert. So we're here now with him. And now let's say we wanted to change that blue, but only the blue that's on him. That's where there's a really cool thing called intersect. But first I'll show you intersect with another tool that shows it better. So there's invert, that's reversing your selection. And then there's intersect. If I want to intersect the mask with something, it's saying I'm doing a new mask, but only inside of this initial selection. And then I'll combine only what's in both of my choices. So I'm going to show it first in a linear grading because I think it shows it better. So I'm taking this mask of the subject and I'm going to intersect with the linear gradient. And as you can see, my mask, my linear gradient is going up, but on him, but nowhere else in the image. So this is really cool. I really like this one. Sometimes I'm selecting the subject and let's say I thought I liked his exposure, I thought, but I wanted to drop the exposure just on the bottom part of him here, drop exposure just a little here, drop the highlights a little. So I didn't do it to the background. I only did it on him, but inside of this linear gradient. Am I talking too fast or any questions on this? Mike, I'm not checking the chat. I figured you are.
I'm watching the chat. You're okay.
Okay. Sometimes I find like with this one, let's see, do I have a bat mitzvah picture here? I might. Okay. For my recent bat mitzvah, select the subject. Did pretty good. It didn't get the top of the Torah. I could add that if I want. I could reduce the size. It's always slow when I'm inside of Zoom. So let's say I was going to add like that, and I could use my brackets to change my size here and then clean that up with the erase a little, but that's good enough for here. And then let's say I wanted to brighten her up a little bit, but just not with her feet in the bottom of her dress. So now I can intersect this with a radial gradient. And I just want this part to be affected by whatever change. I haven't even said what my changes are. But let's say just that part. So the subject inside of this radiant, that's where the intersect comes in. And so let's say I just brighten her up a little and add some sharpness or something. Okay, well, if I don't do much, you're not going to see it. There we go. I super exposed her, but only inside of that radius inside of the subject. So one thing to note, sometimes when you have these masks and submasks, like up here at the top, the mask won't give me the chance to to invert. The invert has to happen in a submask. So if I really didn't want the subject, I wanted everything outside of the subject, here I could invert. Now it's behind her that's in the radius. So I just added a background light with that one. Not that I would do that here, but anything for demonstration purposes. And you can see up here in your little thumbnail of your mask, what part's being affected, or you can use your overlay or both. So let me, here, I'll show a sky one. This is a cool location I get to do a wedding at in a few months. And so actually the exposure of the sky here is not bad. And I think this was actually taken with my iPhone, but let's select sky. And then we're gonna invert. I want everything except the sky. Now it didn't get it all. When the trees, it's not as good as without the trees. And then let's say I want to, no, I'm gonna increase my exposure and my shadows, but not up here. I don't like that. So I am going to, if it'll let me, come on, wake up. Intersect the mask with the linear gradient. I'm gonna show my overlay. I just want to do the bottom part here. So go back to mask. Well, that didn't really make as big of a difference because the sky, all right, bad example. This guy didn't intersect with that very much. And whoever's calling me can just go away. But let's say, well, for the heck of it, I want to intersect that with another linear gradient, because the tree on the left is brighter, but not the one on the right. So I can just come over and pull a linear gradient for the right. So now I've restricted the initial inversion of the sky with two different linear gradients. So you can layer these on top of each other. You can add, subtract, and you can do the intersect where it's only the combination between them. So let's see, which other ones have I not shown? Delete these guys. Color range. Well, we did a little bit of that, but we can go back. Yeah, we did. The color range can really be helpful, especially like, let's say you're doing an outdoor shoot and somebody's wearing green and you want to adjust the green they're wearing, but not in the background. Oh, I have an example for this. It is a, where's my sports one that I pulled out? Sorry, I'll go back to the library. Oh, it's up here. Okay, so I was looking for some fun examples just for exactly these purposes. So let's say we want the, orange basketball and the orange hoop to really stand out, but not the orange of the ground. So we could see how well it does if we say mask, color range. We pick the orange down here, and it picked quite a bit. Actually, I'm going to switch it from green, make it something a little more, let's pick, no, we'll pick fuchsia. There, now I can see it because it's got parts of the legs, it's got a lot in here. So we're going to adjust this with the refinement. That's much better, but you can tell it definitely got, because it turned pink down here, which is what I really wanted to get rid of. But the ball got included as well. So maybe I want to intersect with a radial gradient, and I'm going to pick here, but I'm going to invert this. So now what I've picked does not include here, but it does include the orange that was on the ground. So now I could take that, let me turn off the overlay, and we'll see the orange will change. Let's see, what color do I want? Yeah, I just want to reduce the saturation, or do I want to change the color? There, I made it kind of green like the other. It didn't get it all. It wasn't a perfect example with it. This was a difficult one where maybe you'd be better off going in Photoshop. But this is where I find it can be really powerful to be able to combine some of these masks to make more adjustments in Lightroom than we really ever could before.
Kimberly, could you
Yeah.
just have used a brush and just brushed the ball and the hoop?
Yes, could have, instead of intersect with that.
Yeah.
You know, I think this is one of those things like, you know, like anywhere, there's 10 different ways to do it. And then the question is, which way do you get most comfortable with? Which way are you most familiar with? I do use the brush a lot because then I can brush on and erase off and go back and forth. But something like this one, where let's say I want to change, you know, impact her, but not all the way down to her legs, or, you know, this might be a select subject and then intersect it with a radius. So I'm just getting the subject up here, not behind her. So in the past, when I used to have something like this, I would say, oh, maybe I need to brighten her. I really don't here. The exposure is good, but just for example, I would have done it. Okay, it's freezing a little. There we go. I would have done something, you know, like this, but then this back part of her would have been affected. So with and without the background, like this building and this railing got included here. So something like this, if I say intersect the mask with the subject, and you should see the railing behind her head there, it just darkened back there. So now it's just on her. We'll show the overlay to show you. It's just on her inside of this radius. Now, I could also brush at this point on and off if I wanted to get rid of like part of her arm. Mike, did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to ask, okay, you brighten her upper area. Let's say you wanted to darken her bottom area. Do you add a mask or,
yes, this is
create a new mask?
Create a new mask.
Okay.
And let's say I select the subject again. And this is where you might want to start naming your masks, like brighten face, or, you know, so this new one as her. And let's say on this one, we're going to reduce the exposure. We're going to do it a lot just so you can see the difference. But we only wanted the legs. So I could brush off the upper part. I could use a radius. I could use a linear. What do you guys want me to use?
Linear.
Linear, okay. Intersect mask with linear. And let me show the overlay because that'll help. And so I only want her legs, and it's going to be gradual. So this, you can really play with this. It's fun. And I could have, I could have done that in another way. Let me make that one hidden. I'll create a new mask, select subject. And right now I have my reset sliders automatically. So I'll just do the same, darken like crazy so you can see it. I'll show the overlay. So I could have done a subtract and subtract, let's say, the top in a linear. So essentially what intersect is subtract, like I'm doing right now, and then with an invert. So if I'd gone over the exact same area, it's either subtract the opposite, which I'm doing manually, like this. Whoops, just there. So there was another way to do it. Let's hide that one. Create a new one, select subject. Reduce the exposure and subtract linear. So if I picked the same area I wanted originally, like this, and then said, okay, show the overlay, and then said invert. That's what intersect is doing. It's doing a subtract and invert together at once. So I just think it's a neat addition, neat, a useful addition that they have added. So let's see, let's say I want to add, let's see, we haven't done a sky. Let's see how the sky does in this one. Well, we did a sky, but not a good one. Oh, it's not bad here. So this is, you know, I could subtract with a brush and see you got onto the window and I don't want that impacted here. And let's say I want to reduce the exposure and the highlights in the sky. There, made it stormy. So with and without. So you can do multiple masks, turn them on and off. You can go a little crazy with masking, but it's, I think they've added a lot more power to the masking than they used to have when it was just linear and radial. I mean, most of my edits just had a radius with a little brightening, a little increased shadow on my like barn bat mitzvah families, but I was always brightening up the background between their heads. And now I just do a quick intersect and it fixes that. You know, I'm going to show you one more thing that's kind of cool here then. So let's say, okay, actually, I'm going to, okay, see if, trying to find two pictures that are kind of similar. Not really though. Okay, so this one of her, I do a select subject. Let's say I'm just going to brighten her up just so you guys can see. Not that I would normally do it like this. So then I go to the next picture. And I can control on a PC, Control Alt V copies all the settings from the prior one. I would not normally do this with two different settings, but oftentimes I'm photographing one setting. They were photographed one after another. And I liked my changes in the first one. I can Control Alt V. It just did the same changes here. But if I go to the mask, it's got an exclamation point in it. It's like, I can't just figure out the new subject without you asking me to. Because it knows that it was a subject and it might have changed. So you click this update and it is finding now the subject in this picture. There have been a lot of requests out there for Adobe to make the update subject automatic when you've copied, you know, because if I've done 100 portrait pictures inside the sanctuary at a bar mitzvah, I'd like to be able to copy my settings to all of them and not go to every single picture and say update subject mask, update subject mask. They have not implemented that yet, but once I realized that you could just come over here and it warns you and there's an exclamation point and you click update, it did help quite a bit of my my editing that I was going back to.
Can you export this to Photoshop with the mask on it and continue to work in Photoshop?
That is a really good question. So let's see. Edit in Adobe Photoshop. And since I shared my whole screen, if it doesn't go to my second monitor, you guys should see this.
We're seeing it.
Yeah, well, I can't remember if I opened Adobe last time in the second monitor. So nope. You should be opening. Come on.
Open, open, open.
Open. It's still thinking.
I don't think it would keep the
Doesn't,
selection
no,
for
I
you.
don't, but this is a good time for me to show you that if we go to Camera Raw, the masks are up here to the right. So click here, here's your select subject, select sky, brush, linear, radial. I think they're adding depth range. I think that's why it's grayed out. It's next. But so you have the same things here. Select subject. So once again, did a pretty good job. And you can add, subtract. You still have the options for, should have the invert and the intersect. Yep, intersect. You can duplicate it too if you know that you want to do two separate things to the same mask, but you might, one of them want to, you know, remove a part of it. You can just do a duplicate of that. So like here in this mask, if I was doing something and I wanted to, you know, I'd probably want to add in her other arm that it did not think was in there, and I can erase. So in Camera Raw, you only get one brush on and one erase off. In Lightroom, you get two brushes that you set. You still have invert here or in your three dots. So that was a good test though. No, it doesn't bring your masks over. So decide, no, you don't have to save it. Decide where you're going to do your work. And then, I mean, so I do often do a lot of my editing in Lightroom and then go over to Photoshop because I need to remove something. And, you know, I need more control than I have in Lightroom with the ability to do that, or if I want to add a color layer or something. So, okay, what other questions on this? I feel like I've gone through it all, but I'm happy to show more things.
You answered my question. Any other-
Can you select all and update and rather than going through one at a time? I may have missed that.
No, with the, not with the subject. The subject is what's taking the, like, their AI tool. And so if I added a mask and let's say it's not the subject, we're going to delete this guy, delete mask. Okay. No, delete all. I thought there was a delete all. Oh, I tried to delete and I made a copy. Delete all masks. Okay. So let's say I'm not doing subject. Let's say I've just decided I want a radial and I just want to brighten this area. Which also gets the brick behind her. Once again, this is where I would consider intersecting with the subject. But if I now take this and in here, you can go to settings and copy settings. You can also do it with a Control-C or
Mm.
Command, I believe. You have the option to include your mask.
Oh.
And so you can copy, and I can go to this photo, and then I'm doing a Control-V, so that's paste. So it did paste it. You saw it brightened up. Now I can go to the mask and come here and, oh, it needs to be here for her
Mm.
and move it, which is how I used to do a lot of my, oh, I just needed the face a little brighter on some of these portraits, but I like it so much better now to be able to say intersect with the subject. And you'll notice the background will calm down here with the brightness in a second.
Hmm.
So she just really popped off of it because it only picked her inside of that
Hmm.
oval. But now if I copy this one and paste it over, which I will do to show you settings, copy, including the mask, it has an exclamation point. It's saying right now, you're going to be in a little bit of trouble trying to copy that. So if we go to this one and we Control-V, it copied whatever settings. I didn't see anything change in any oval. And that's because if I go to the mask, oh, come on. I thought I pasted. Let's try it again. Paste setting. There. Okay, it is there, but the initial oval is there. But the subject submask has an
Mhm.
exclamation point and it's grayed out. So I can still move this oval to really where she is, because I don't want to intersect it with the subject here. I'm only going to get her arm, but I'm going to move it over to her. Now go to the subject, click on it, and this update shows up on the right. Click it. There.
Mm.
So you can see if the overlay will come back. Come on. Overlay. There. It's just her inside of that oval. So it is really good. You can copy, but anytime you used sky or subject, any of the ones that take the artificial intelligence of Adobe to handle, those needed to recalculate when you get to your next image. And Jeannie, what's your question?
So I'm looking at this as using it for replace sky, perhaps. We have that replace sky already, but sometimes it doesn't select all of the sky or it selects something that you don't want to. And I hadn't figured out how to really deal with that and what was going on already. So maybe this would be a good thing to use.
No, I mean,
to
you
replace
could even,
sky.
if you're in Photoshop with it, with replace sky, you can bring it into Camera Raw, do the masking in there where you can add and subtract as well. Do I have a good sky one? I didn't. Oh, this one is not going to work at all, I don't think. There's only so much we can ask them to do with this many trees. But let's see. Select sky. Well, it's not bad, but yes, I could come in here now and add maybe with a brush at my 50% power, my brush B, and I can use the brackets to make it smaller or the levers to the side. And maybe I am adding in here, and then I could paint it back off too with the erase after. So maybe I'm trying to add into the trees, depending on what you're going to do too, because if you don't mind if the trees get affected. Usually we would, though, you know,
I
those
think in
judges.
Photoshop, the sky replacement would probably work better than what this is doing here.
Yeah, I think it's based on the same AI, and I have had some issues with the sky replacement as well, Jeannie. So I know what you're talking about.
Maybe Michael knows how to alter that better than I do, because I go in there, I look at the mask, and there's a couple of different masks. When you do the replace sky, you've got they're different masks at different opacities, and I don't really know how to manipulate those to get what I want.
Yeah, I mean, you can come in here and modify it. You can do the same thing inside of Photoshop with Camera Raw,
Yeah.
but and you could start with your select sky and then go into mask and select and mask to
Yeah.
add to it as well.
Maybe that would do it. Thank you.
Any other questions out there?
So if I'm getting this right, the select sky here is selecting the sky, but it's to make adjustments to it, it's not actually to replace it, correct?
Yes, I don't believe we have, unless I haven't found it yet.
I think sky replacement is only in Photoshop.
I think it is too. Let's see. I thought there was something every once in a while I check the menus because something they're like, hey, when did that get added? And a lot of times Adobe takes whatever it's put into Photoshop and then it tries to bring it into Lightroom later.
But
So
could you do 100% mask, which would mean that you could take out the sky and then replace it with something else?
but we don't have the
opacity?
same layers in Lightroom here, like to put in a layer of another sky. There isn't. The masks
Yeah,
are represented in layers.
right. Which I
Um,
think you would have to take it to Photoshop to finish up, but you could do the mask and then go to Photoshop.
Yeah, but the masks don't carry over as well. As
I
we
do
were saying.
that frequently, actually, just to, when I've got a difficult select and replace sky in Photoshop, what I'll do in Lightroom or in Camera Raw is I'll take the sky and change it from blue to white. And that way I've got a very identifiable select sky, or change it to another solid blue, something that in Photoshop it'll recognize more easily between the trees and branches and what have you.
This might also be an option here for the luminance range. You can click, and pick the range of luminance and then adjust it. I just wanted the brightest spots here. And then I could also intersect this like with an inversion of the subject to get the barn out. So let's say I wanted this whole luminance range. Let me turn off the overlay so we can see what I'm doing. And let's say I'm just going to add a whole lot of blue so we can, I just intensified it like crazy. But you can tell it's affecting down here as well. So maybe I'd want to subtract with a brush the sidewalk so it's not so blue, because I was trying to do it to the sky. I was trying to go nuts on the sky and get rid of the building part that's added blue and this sidewalk. So now the sky went way, way blue, but I took it off of the sidewalk. So between the luminance range and the color, you can really play with some of your images. You can get lost here for hours.
At risk of opening Pandora's box on that previous question about whether you could go back and forth to Camera Raw, for example, and then to Photoshop, and then go back and readjust your adjustments. If you get familiar with using smart objects, you can do that. And I've gone from probably 90% Photoshop to now 90% Camera Raw. And I go back and forth because using the local adjustments in Camera Raw, and especially with this masking now, it really makes it much easier dodging, burning, doing all kinds of things that are much more difficult in Photoshop. So if you kind of learn how to use smart objects, you can.
Yeah,
flip
now
back.
I don't believe that will carry over into Lightroom. I like using smart objects as well in Photoshop, and it goes into Camera Raw, but I don't think it'll carry into here.
Yeah, it sends you back to Camera Raw from Lightroom, and then I'm not sure where you kind of get stuck, I think, in Lightroom.
Yeah, it's but I will say these changes have made it so where I used to do so much less in Lightroom and so much more in Photoshop. And now because I can bring in, 1,000 photos from an event and pretty much come up with one setting and populate it to all of them, including maybe a radius mask in the middle, to brighten and add the little sharpness into the middle and just populate that to 1,000 photos all at once. You're not going to do that in Photoshop. So
To build off what Hutch is saying, I'm wondering if you did your basic adjustments in Lightroom, like we're doing now with your masking, whatever, to get it kind of where you want it. If you export or ship it out of Lightroom to Photoshop, then start working in smart layers, working your camera raw on those smart layers. Then when you save it, it comes back into Lightroom as a PSD. Should
Yes.
include all those layers that you did in Photoshop.
it would, just not the original
And-
stuff, because when it goes over, I believe, when it goes over
Right,
from
yeah.
Lightroom into Photoshop, it goes over like with the adjustments as one, not that can be separated back out again. But once you're in
Right.
Photoshop and you do all that, yes. And I've gone back then, realized like, oh, I missed this. I had a little mistake up here in the upper corner. I missed a spot. I'd go back into Photoshop in the PSD and make an adjustment, and then it'll just update it in Lightroom.
When you
It-
export from Lightroom to Photoshop, can you export as a smart object?
Mhm.
I don't know, because I usually go
Hutch?
here and I say edit in, or
Open as a
Yeah,
smart
right,
object.
Yep,
right at the
open
bottom.
as
a
Open
smart object.
in Photoshop.
Okay, so you can. So make a really wicked correction,
okay, well, this one has that super blue sky.
right?
So let's see when it comes in, if it
And it still has
sees
the mask
of
on it,
that.
right?
It had the mask. So would I be able to see that mask in camera raw?
No, you don't need to use the filter now. Now just go down and click on the little smart object icon down below. And that'll take you back, I believe, to camera raw, and then you can continue from there.
Yeah, if you just double click on the icon on your layer panel there.
Okay,
should
not
bring it
on
back.
the layer.
No, the icon where the eyeball, right next to the eyeball, up and left.
Yes.
It's
Down.
Down a hair,
Down.
Okay.
right
Oh,
next to it.
Sure.
Click,
There.
double click on that.
okay. I thought that's what I was thinking. But then I thought you didn't want me to click on
No,
the
that's okay.
image. Okay, sorry.
I can't communicate with women.
No,
Just
at
ask my
least
wife.
you know it. No, I'm kidding.
I'm not even from Mars. I'm from way out there. Okay, so it brings it into
Brings you
Camera
into
raw.
camera raw.
But now let me go to the masking, and is it
and
there?
see if it shows
It
the match.
is.
All right, cool.
Ah,
Yay, yay team. We got that figured out, because now I could come in here, show it, and say, oh, look, I missed. So subtract as a brush. I missed this whole area. I want to get it off the windows.
The only
And-
rub on it is that, I can go back and forth fairly easily between Lightroom and camera raw, because I work in camera raw mostly. The hang up are people that have never used camera raw before, all of a sudden they're back out into a whole new interface, but
Yeah, all the tools are there. They're just not in the same place.
it's not in the same place exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so the interesting thing right now would be if I'm saving this then as a PSD, it's probably not even going to go to the right spot. Who cares? I'll just put it there. And then I exit out. Will the mask that I just adjusted come back adjusted here, and I'm able to see it as a mask, or does it not come back as a smart? I
You
think
can
it,
test it.
Oh.
The only way to do a lot of things is just test it and see what happens.
exactly. No, that was a good test. I'm glad we did that.
The only caution to people that don't use smart objects or not are familiar with them is that a smart object layer in Photoshop will not behave with some adjustments properly. So it kind of throws you. There's some workarounds for doing that, but be aware that some of your tools will not work on a smart object layer. I'll just leave it at that. And
And then
Okay,
you
so
gotta go back into
here's that.
RAW.
Here's the one that came back from Photoshop. Go into the mask. It doesn't have a mask anymore.
um,
You just showed it.
wait a
I thought you
minute.
just showed it with the mask.
No, that was the original one, the one
Oh.
that went out to Photoshop. This is
Oh,
the
I see, yeah.
PSD. It
Okay,
went to a different spot, so I had to pick it in a different place in my library. This is
Okay.
the PSD, and it doesn't show that it has any masks.
Okay,
So it didn't come back with Photoshop with the mask,
but the
but
original file probably would.
yeah, you could go back to Photoshop, and if I went into Photoshop, modified this PSD, saved it, and then just refreshed here, it updates it in Lightroom. So
Now, if you were to go back to that file that you just saved and opened it, will it have those masks on it? The PSD, not maybe, is it Lightroom that's not seeing the mask?
that it didn't bring back the camera raw mask. It is
Right.
just seeing the PSD as a new file it's looking at.
Do those masks stay when you save the file or no? I'm assuming they
Yes,
don't.
they, no,
Oh, they do.
They do in Photoshop. If I opened up Photoshop right now again, and I go back to that same last file. There it is. Yeah, it
Oh,
is
smart
here.
object.
Okay, so if you open that back up,
It's thinking.
Photoshop and Zoom don't like playing together.
No,
very well.
and Photoshop, Lightroom, and Zoom altogether don't like it. And so now here, because it's a smart object, it should have it still saved. If it wasn't a smart object,
There
it
it
wouldn't be.
is.
Yep,
Okay.
there it is.
okay.
And we can
Cool.
tell it's the one where I'd removed it.
Now you can
So-
change that, go back to Photoshop, and those changes should be in effect in Photoshop. And it
Right.
should still be a smart object, so you should be able to go back and forth and back and
So-
forth.
So
Endless.
let me, yeah, because I'm gonna do something just to make it more obvious. We're gonna change the color of the sky. Okay, there we go. We changed it in Photoshop. It's disgusting. But I just want to be able to tell. I'm gonna save it in Photoshop. Now I close it. And when I come here, and I was just doing this the other day, I had to remember.
Now go back and reopen your Photoshop file and you'll have a smart object. The smart object layer will still be there.
It will, but it will update
Yeah.
in here too. There's just a refresh I have to do, and I always forget where that is. But because this is the PSD file, there is somewhere in here a like refresh from the file, and it's already been imported in Lightroom, but it kind of looks at the data newly again. And I'm not remembering offhand where it is right now.
If you right click on the folder, it will show you the sync function, I think. If you know where you put it, just right click on that.
Mhm.
And I believe there's a,
here it is.
yeah, synchronized folder.
Ah,
Update.
thank you.
It's already done it.
It just did it.
Oh yeah, I just did it by coming over. And that's usually what happens. I move around, all of a sudden it just, it does it on its own. So
Hmm.
now it's ugly, but we know that that's the change we made in Photoshop, and we didn't have to make another change in Lightroom. So,
But now if you were to make a change in Lightroom and if you export it again as a smart object, you're probably going to keep
it would be a
everything,
new
right?
file. It would be like a edit 2.
It wouldn't be saving the camera raw masks then. It would only be saving the Lightroom.
I don't believe so. I think we'd be confusing it at that point.
Not the old one. It would save as a new, like you say, a new
Exactly.
Photoshop file with.
Hmm.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions about the masking?
Great
It's-
job. Thank
it-
you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Amazing.
It's worth playing with, I think. It's definitely more powerful than Lightroom used to be before